So my guest today is Apiwe Bubu, a pianist, producer, composer, and audio engineer. Over the last 20 years, he has built a career that stretches from composing for television and radio to engineering and producing in major projects while running his own studio, DJing, and building Amapiano Vibe, a cultural and lifestyle label. Welcome.
Thank you.
Where did you grow up?
Born and part raised in Mthatha, Eastern Cape, till about 12 years old. So early childhood, and then moved to Johannesburg for boarding school. Just 1995, around the times of when the world, South Africa was changing. And I was in Bosmont, that's like almost southwest-ish.
Yeah.
Boarding school there. And then my last 2 years of high school in Pretoria.
How do you end up at boarding school in Joburg?
Yeah,
What was happening that from Mthatha, there's a lot of schools, Eastern Cape, Mthatha, there's Grahamstown, there's lots of schools in that space, and the area is kind of known for education, right?
Mm-hmm.
But you end up all the way Jozi.
Yeah. So that was quite a decision that was made by the family. My mom's sister, elder sister, had a daughter who came to boarding school in Johannesburg, right? St. Barnabas College is the school. Mm. And it was a particularly unique school in the sense that the headmaster there had been this principal for like 20 years, 25 years at the time. And he built the school, I think it started in the 70s. And their MO or their motto and mode of operandi was it should be a mixed school. So whites, blacks, coloreds in apartheid era South Africa. So he's a German by descent and his wife. And so he caught a lot of flack from the government that he was, the legalities of that. Mm. And so it was like almost like a school founded on the struggle against apartheid. And then it had a very forward-thinking approach in academia and the freedom of a student to be unique. The rules weren't like you've got to toe the line. The rules were you've just got to be exceptional, good at what you do, and you can do what you want, which is you can have your dreadlocks, you can wear your earring. This was, So then she convinced my mom, like, this is probably the best school in South Africa. And that's why my mom would say, like, this school sounds very special. And then I looked at the other schools in the Eastern Cape. Comparatively, they seemed like they were just towing the line.
Yeah.
And so I remember my dad asked me, do you really want to go to Johannesburg? You're like 12 years old. And I said, yeah, I think I can do boarding school at 12. Lo and behold, when they dropped me off, I remember that first night, it was like, whoa, now it's cry time. And then I cried that night, and then that was it. From then on, I was like, you're stuck here. Your parents have just driven back 1,000 miles. They're not going to be here. You're going to call them once a week, which is the time we had to call once a week on a payphone. Mm. So they'd always ask you, you're not calling enough, because they can't get a hold of you, no cell phones. So I think that experience really shaped those years were the formative years of like the independency, taking care of yourself, being away from family, getting to understand how to navigate society with friends you have and your circle that you build at the boarding school. So yeah, the St. Barnabas College was unique in that sense, and that's why I chose it.
Did you have a sense of what you wanted to be when you grew up at that stage?
Not really, no. And that's where I discovered the piano. So like I said, it was a liberal school. Mm. So there was pianos. It was like the formation of each block was a quad with an open piazza in the middle, and then each corner had a piano room. So you could literally just be like, walking past some classrooms, and then the piano room, you open the door, you get in, close the door, and you can play. And then I think that's what the spark was, right? I was like, piano. Then I started taking piano lessons, but I never thought there was a career behind it. I still thought, okay, academia is what I'm going to do. I was good at the math. I was good at the science. So I could handle the academia. Mm-hmm. But I think that was the spark. That was like later on, I figured like, hey, I think actually music is where my passion lies.
And you say you ended up in Pretoria.
Ended up in Pretoria for the last 2 years. My parents moved up from Umtata to Pretoria, and then decision was made to finish the last 2 years in CBC, Christian Brothers College, which was vastly different. Now I had to cut the dreadlocks. I just became another, generic student in that system.
What are your earliest memories of music?
I think definitely Michael Jackson was an obsession, because this was like 10 years old when I was still in Umtata. Basically, possibly the only artist I cared to listen to, besides what I heard, right? Parents playing, Brenda Fassie was big. But Michael Jackson, Thriller, Bad. I used to come home almost every day after school. I had the VHS tape of his Dangerous tour or something, which one of them. And I studied the moves. I would do the moonwalk. So that was then my first, music consumption.
And then you come out, when you finished high school, what was the thinking? What was the plan? I mean, you talk about, you mentioned that you thought academia might be the thing for you.
Yeah. Because I did CBC, and then I wasn't taking piano lessons those last 2 years, right? And I wasn't doing sports. I was just going to school. I was a day scholar. And then I just was like not too sure what to do next. Like, okay, you do the career day when you're trying to choose what you're gonna do. So I just focused on getting good grades. And then I said, okay, let me figure it out like towards the end of matric. And then finally I was like, let me do aeronautical engineering, which is what I went to do at WITS. And because it sounded interesting, I was like, oh, you design some planes, and I think I was seeking some type of creativity, and engineering sounded like a lot of science, but with some creative aspect in it. I did 6 months at WITS, and I was like, no, this is definitely not it. So I dropped out the first year.
What was it like, actually? Because you said your parents moved up for your last 2 years. What was it like all of a sudden living back at home? Like living under, you've been in boarding school. Obviously there's rules, but there's also a certain element of independence, particularly from your parents and from your family. What was it like then, going to a new school, and then you're back under the control of your parents?
Yeah. I think funny enough, I don't recall it being difficult to deal with that. Like, it didn't even occur that now I was like, following the rules of the household and not living in boarding school anymore. I think what was more difficult to adjust was the school itself. The frame of mind of the students and stuff, which was not as independent as what I came from. The teachers, same thing. And I remember I missed St. Barnabas College so much. Like, it was almost like, like a breakup. It's like I'd dream about being back at the school, and then I'd wake up and I'd be like, oh, damn.
You go to school.
I have to go to this school. I'm not back, So I think that independence with the family, that was fine, because I think it was cool to reconnect with them and be at home and be with my siblings. So that wasn't an issue. It was just the school. 2 sisters, 2 brothers. Older brother, 2 sisters behind me that are twins, and a younger brother.
What path did they take?
All very different paths, eh? Construction on my elder brother's side, quantity surveying, and then me, music. One of my sisters did marketing degree, the other one economics, and then my younger brother more in the banking and finance space. And then the marketing sister also went into music too. So she does a lot in as far as having that marketing background and doing singer-songwriting and performing.
Your parents, what did they do?
Mostly, I'd say dad was in he studied, I think, Bachelor of Commerce, and then he went into business and also had a career like with like either the government or he'd be in a parastatal managerial position, directorship position, so more on the business side of things, and my mom too on the business side of things and corporate.
When did you take up piano again?
Yeah, that one, I remember after Vids I dropped out, and then I was like, now I don't know what to do. So I said to my folks, look, I don't want to waste this tuition money. The 6 months has already shown me that aeronautical is not going to happen. So I took the rest of that year off. I wasn't doing piano lessons still. And then I said, let me take the second year as a proper year off. I've already taken the 6 months to think, but I don't think I've figured it out. And then I got to the second year and I worked at a Roman's Pizza in Hatfield. I remember that year was very interesting because then I took a lot of time to think because I was like, okay, I'll just make some change to enjoy myself, go out. I'm living at home, but at least I'll spend my money if I go out. I work maybe 4 days a week, 5 days, and then I'm like thinking the whole time when I'm serving and I'm working. And it was like a spinning a tray that you'd serve with, and I got so good at spinning that tray and just thinking. And I was like, what is my life going to be now that I'm definitely not going to do this aeronautical thing? And it was always a slow building conversation of like, I think it's music, right? You have a piano background, you can play piano, you need to go back to studying and practicing. And then I think that next year is when I said, okay, I'm going to do sound engineering to my parents, which was like, I can't do music, obviously, still no ways. It's like, what do you mean? You're going to die a pauper? What are you talking? So I said, no, I'll do sound engineering. They said, what's the jobs look like? And there's jobs that, engineers, at least in sound, and technicians can get. They said, okay. Then I went to Randburg, moved back to Joburg by myself in Blagauri. And then I took an engineering course at In-House Audio Training Institution, which is I don't know if it's still there, across Mnet.
Okay. No, I don't.
Bram Fisher and Republic, that corner there. And then I went and I started taking piano lessons again. I think there was a piano teacher house somewhere in that area too, a walk away. And back to scales, back to reading. It was tough at the time. I mean, I'm like 20, and there's been this gap of not doing this thing. But I was determined. I said, no, now I have to play catch up. But, I still feel like this is the path I should take.
I like to jump around sometimes. I mean, you just came out with your debut album. It feels like your debut album. But you've been in the industry for what, over 20 years?
Yeah.
Why take so long?
Yeah. Would it be perfection? Would it be busy with other people's projects? Not really taking the art like as me being the artist. It's always been me being the producer angle. Obsessed about engineering. So me being the mix engineer, me being the recording engineer. And then I'm in the studio listening to the artist's ideas and then doing the production. And it never really occurred like I need to put out an album. And also it just was like, what album am I going to put out? Because I'm influenced by so much music, so I can't even decide which genre I'm going to go for. So eventually, then it made sense that, look, what is the basis of all the ideas? Where's the structural foundation of your musical background? And I thought it's jazz piano, because I moved from classical to jazz. And if it's hip hop, I like the jazz chords behind that. If it's R&B, I still like the jazz chords in there. If it's any type of music, that color, that texture of harmony is going to be in any genre, house, So I thought the album then, if I put it out when I was ready to, which was coincidentally last year, I was like, let me do not even a jazz album with instruments like drums, bass, and let me just do just the instrument that I've spent so much time on, and make it just about that. So then I was like, feels right to put out now an album that speaks to me and who I am and really what the fundamental of my musicianship is.
I mean, you had a relationship with Andile Yanana, he is rooted in jazz. So you had a relationship with him around then.
Right? Back in, I think it was 2008 even when we met.
Yeah, so it does sound a little weird that you had this relationship with this kind of renowned and respected jazz pianist, and it's taking you this journey, and we'll get into that journey, but it's taking you this journey to kind of, to a certain extent, feels like go semi full circle, and back to going, actually, this is the space. This is the space that I need to be. How was that journey in between? Kind of, how did that solidify your thinking?
Yeah, because I think I was picking up ideas from different artists, because it was even for moving and studying at Berklee. I'd spent a lot more time with jazz artists there. Given the history of Berklee too, it was kind of founded on these amazing jazz artists at the time and ideas that were like new in the 50s. Duke Ellington, Quincy Jones was in there at some point. And so there was a fundamental basis of what Berklee was, what they liked to accept. And still, I was in the jazz scene, and that's how I auditioned as a jazz pianist. But then the reason I even did it so much was that I still knew that contemporary music production was the driving force. Even though I loved the jazz piano, it was still production that I spent so much time wanting to be in the studio for. So I still think of myself more of a producer than an artist. The jazz piano is like a byproduct of still the vision of a producer. And so the guys I really listened to, Pharrell Williams and the Neptunes as producers, these super producers at the time. And so for me to get into Berklee, I knew that they were going to be like, okay, how good of a producer are you? Right? It was always like, how good of a pianist are you? And then through that, you can get a scholarship as a jazz piano performer, at least in the audition itself. And then you get into the major later. So your first 2 years is like core musical fundamentals. And I think because that was my mind frame, I wasn't thinking I'm going to put out an album that is going to be eventually a jazz piano album. So which is why it took all those years of me even being in the studio in LA and still like, I want to make an album that speaks to the production side of me. So then I think I put out an EP that had that. I put out the EP Promised Land. So it had my vocal ideas, some rap textures in it, the jazz, influence in the harmonics of the production. And that was like, okay, that speaks to my production, mindset. And then when it came to now coming back home and feeling like I'd spent enough time on the piano and really honed in that performative space. And I was like, okay, I feel like I have all these songs that I've written also that are piano based. That's when I ended up saying, let me just, record the songs and put out the album.
How did Berklee come about?
So after, remember when I was in Blairgowrie studying that at in-house audio training, the next year, because it was a 1-year certificate, and then the next year, I was lucky enough to get a junior composing job position at Urban Brew, the post-production side, which is at the time called Urban Rhythm Factory, also in Randburg. So I was a junior composer under Abe Sibia, who's a prolific composer, and Nick Lubaskachny, I think at the time was operational head. So he apparently went to Berklee in '74. And then he kind of introduced me to Berklee and told me, okay, I see you're talented, you're a composer, but you haven't studied more than what you studied, which was the audio training stuff. So he told me about Berkeley, and I was like, "Yeah, sounds like a pipe dream. Where's this? Boston." I'm like, "How much?" "Oh, no ways. We're talking $30,000 a month. I mean, a semester, 40." And but the more I looked into the school, the more I was just like, if you're really going to do it at the highest level possible, and give yourself the education or get the education that can even get you prepared for that, then it sounds like this is the best option. And then at that point, I became obsessed about this feat that seemed impossible at the time. So that's how I found out about Berkeley.
You talk about auditioning to enter. What's that process like?
Yeah, it's a hectic.
Especially coming from, for example, coming from South Africa, where, like you just said, to a certain extent, it feels like a impossible dream or a very distant dream. And then all of a sudden, there you are. You have the opportunity to realize that dream. I can imagine the pressures is different from an American kid trying to get into the space.
Yeah. That I mean, when the years have passed and you've forgotten the sometimes traumatic experience of doing that and going through that, because I even had to relinquish work here, space like Urban Brew. I was like, okay, this sounds like the amount of hours I have to spend preparing and getting to that level means I can't go to work and be a composer 9 to 5, or even ended up at Sonovision where I was doing radio as an engineer. And I even remember the HR would come to me and were like, "Are you sure you want to quit this job? Because a lot of people want this job." And I said, "Yeah," and I get it. It's like a top
And
level.
if you leave it, like there's no space left. You can't come back.
You can't come back. So I said, "No, the decision I've made is solid. This is what I'm going to go for, which is this auditions I'm going to do. I need time to sit at home and practice." And I remember I'd sit 6 hours a day type of average amount of time I was sitting and practicing. And they would only come once a year to do the audition. So you'd have to wait, because I'm not affording a flight to Boston or anything. So the first audition I remember was Mozambique. And that was the first time I even left the country to go anywhere outside of South Africa. I remember I practiced, and then the month came around to go. I booked a flight with no accommodation resolved, just a backpack and a sleeper bag. And I landed in the airport, and they were speaking Portuguese, and I was like, "This now I feel like I'm outside South Africa. They're even speaking a different language." And I just gave the guy the address on the paper that I had. It was a music school in Maputo. And that was my first encounter with them. As like the faculty was there, like four of the 5 faculty were there doing the auditions. And it was the same day that I landed. So I didn't even get time to rest. I went straight to the audition. Nervous wreck, because now you've got a prepared piece. You've got to improvise on top of some changes that they give you. So they ask you some questions just to check your theory. And it's my first audition. And yeah, was there was like okay, this is what happens in this room. It's tough. And that wasn't a successful audition. But then I was like, okay, didn't happen this time. You get a response a couple months in an email. So you're still waiting after your audition to figure out if you even made it. Then I was like, I got to do it again then. Get prepared. I've got a year this time. So they would come once a year. The next one was, I think, Durban. And then the next one was Kenya. So I went to Kenya for that. Nairobi, again, sitting at the piano. 3rd year now. But I'm like, no, I'm not going back to work. Wow. I'm just going to keep at this. And then the 4th one was Cape Town. So I said, okay, at least I don't have to fly out the country for this audition. Cape Town worked out. It was around the jazz festival time. For some reason, the email came faster. Didn't take months to wait. They said, great, congratulations. You've been accepted and audition worked, and yeah, when would you like to start? And I was like, sure. Now this is 4 years in. I'm like, okay. Now we start a whole different journey, which is the funding. The NAC got involved, and the monies to be in America, which is a whole different, cost of living. But the audition part of that was like that struggle, which was very, very, painful, but rewarding, ultimately.
But also a lesson in resilience and persistence.
I think, and then persistence is like become my mode of operation. It's like I even have it in bio where I speak on Calvin Coolidge's quote on persistence, where he says, just to, summarize, he's like, no, persistence is the ultimate virtue or thing that gets you through or gets things done. Education will not, because there's a lot of educated derelicts. He says two other things. He says two other things that you think talent will not. He says there's a lot of talented people who haven't, but he says persistence is the ingredient that really gets things across the line. So I think I agreed with that, because it was just persistence, in those auditions.
And is that also kind of what drove you to it feels like, having looked at your background, having looked at some of the stuff that you've done, it feels like you've taken full advantage of these opportunities that have come your way, in terms of once you got to Berklee, establishing yourself within the industry, but also multiple parts of it.
Yeah. I think Berklee was it almost felt like it was real life, in the sense, besides being an educational experience and a campus, it mirrored the industry that we were all going to step into, which is you had to take it as if you'd already started your career. Like what you were doing at the school meant what your trajectory looked like in your career. It wasn't like, I'll figure this out after I'm done. When I graduate, it's like, no, these professors and this faculty is plugged into the industry. These students that you're with are going to be plugged into the industry. So those relationships that you're building, that means a lot in the real space of when you call Universal. Either the kid at business major is in the office there now, and is eventually going to climb to become either the CEO of that, and the talented keyboard players in going to be with that band touring with this big artist, Bruno Mars, or these are all familiar faces to you at that point, because then everyone is going out, and because of that preparation that they had at Berklee, already have a network that means something in the industry.
What did you major in?
Music production and engineering, which was one major, and the second major in contemporary production and composition.
So what does that mean in English for the rest of us?
For the writers, the second major, the contemporary production and writing, was for compositional, melody writing, harmony writing, lyrics too a bit, but there was a whole different songwriting major. So this was more like the compositional aspects, motifs. Even the final of that major was writing an orchestral score and conducting that. So it got my writing chops, proper. And then this one was like my production and engineering chops, being in the studio, the sound, the recording, what mics you're using, the decisions that you're making about the sonics and the ideas of like the production overall quality, and if it's a band, if it's a contemporary production. So those two majors, I remember the scholarship office was always like, why are you doing two majors? Because I'll be like, hey man, I need more money. They're like, yeah, we gave you the money, but you're doing two majors. You're trying to be out of here as quick as possible, 4 years. I was like, no, but the information I'm getting in each of these majors is crucial to what I'm trying to achieve when I get out of here. And I also did a minor in writing music for TV and new media, because of that background from TV writing, from Urban Brew, and the compositional aspect of writing to picture and briefs from shows, So I was like, let me do this minor too on top of that. They were like, two majors and a minor from Africa. Good luck. And I was like, no, I'll get it. 5 years, I think I did it in 4. So it was a lot of pressure on myself because the hours that you have to put in for those credits is like, yeah, there's no time to even hang out. You're in the studio, and the studio's closed for like 2 hours a day. So they were open pretty much 22 hours a day. So I would do my writing stuff in the day with my writing major. And then at night, I was in the studio till 4 a.m., then in class at 9 a.m. And you're just doing that cycle and living off coffee and not sleeping 6-7 days a week. A lot of zombies walking around you also, like, I haven't slept for the 9 a.m. And it's like, yeah, man. And then you got to sit at the piano too and make sure you're getting your chops in. It's like going to the gym. If you're not in the practice room, it's going to show. Yeah. So that was a hectic, because I thought the auditions were tough, they were tough. But the program at Berklee, and then you're like, wait a minute, it only gets harder. This is a rough life that I'm living right now. And you think you're like, oh, music's so enjoyable. We're gonna have fun at school. It's like, no, we're gonna break you basically, and then you're gonna be made after you've just surrendered to the fact that this is a tough 4 years you're in for.
No, because it doesn't matter what career it is, doesn't matter what discipline or pursuit. There's a craft to it, and I think it's one of my things, because I find that a lot of people don't recognize or realize the craft element side of it, the putting in the work, the mechanics of stuff, and especially when it comes to anything kind of, let's say, media and entertainment related.
Yeah.
Because what it presents is, it's like you're saying, making music is, music is fun. Not realizing the amount of blood, sweat, and tears that goes into actually creating it and crafting it. So I'm listening to you talk, and so my son is doing a degree in sound production.
Okay.
And yeah, I must play this for him. I must play this for him, but at the same time also, I'm just thinking, Berklee is renowned kind of worldwide. But I'm also glad that, so for example, just in South Africa, there's a couple of schools that have come up where I don't have to worry about him getting into the US to be able to gain those skills.
Yeah.
And there's ASE, and there's SAE, and there's COPA, and I found, because he was looking to do this thing, I found a couple of schools where it's like, at least we're carrying the skills, and therefore it's important also, not necessarily giving back, but your story and stories of people like you who focus on that side of it is important for those to be heard, for people to get a fuller sense of what it means to be involved in sound.
Yeah. I remember, my first rodeo with that was the Audio Training Institute in Randburg, which was having to make that decision, which school is going to facilitate enough education and training for me to even land a job, or is it credible? ASC and them would come up at the time when my decision making was, I was just trying to make the decision to find the best sound engineering school in Johannesburg.
Yeah, look, like with many things, the landscape can be difficult, because the opportunities aren't as many within the country. When you tell most people, and I remember we went for an open day at one of the schools, and half the parents were like, what does this mean? Is this person going to become a DJ? Like, what does it mean? Because we don't understand, the average person doesn't understand the possible job opportunities.
Right.
And like the conversation you had with your parents, like the question they asked makes perfect sense. What are you going to do? Okay, sharp, you're going to...
What's your day-to-day?
Like, what what jobs can you get?
Yeah.
And often parents, that's your biggest concern, that your child's not going to end up, a pauper, etc. But also now in this kind of evolving and rapidly changing world, how are those skills going to help you moving forward? And that becomes the biggest concern.
Yeah.
But I'm interested in how you started taking advantage and building that network and started getting work out of school.
Yeah. I remember because, when you, as they say, when as an immigrant, you seem to work twice as hard for the situation that you're in, right? Because you don't have a fallback. Your parents aren't there. You have no family, and like for 1,000 miles, if you're homeless, there's a problem because there's no support. But being at Berklee too, in that sense of like, okay, I've got to figure this out. Talk to people, befriend. It was like they'd always, and it was a big buzzword, network. It's like, oh, you got to network with your peers and the students, and it was a bit like, that's too formal. Let's just hang out, and you made friends like that, and then obviously you apply yourself in the craft. And for me, coming out of that experience and making and plugging, or at least developing the relationships with the faculty. There was one particular, he'd moved from music production to, he was, I think, chief of staff of the president at Berklee, who I had also a great relationship with. But then he would hear what I was doing on the engineering field, because he was an engineer too, who was in New York. He had all these relationships with big time engineers and producers in the business. And he was like, oh, I love what you're doing. And he's like, I was having a conversation with Tony Maserati, and he's like, he needs an assistant to come in, in his camp and in his studio and work with him. And I thought about you. And I was like, you mean the Tony Maserati? He's like, yeah. And I was like, oh, that sounds dope if it happens. And he's like, yeah, I'll let you know. The conversation is ongoing. And so he put that thing together, in as far as like, okay, he told Tony about me. Then he had me reach out to Tony, one of Tony's chief engineers in the company. And I remember I was out in LA. It was spring break, and it was when I was starting to figure out, now, okay, we've got one more year left of this, but you've got to try get a job coming out, which is the tricky part, because then it's like we're all competing for some position in that music industry space. But that spring break, I met up with him for drinks. We didn't even talk music. We just talked life, general stuff, what he was going through life-wise, what I was going through just life-wise. And we got along. And then he went back and told Tony, he's cool. You should bring him on. And then I remember I went for summer internship with them at that point. After the spring break, I said, okay, I'll fly to LA, spend 3 months with them as an intern. And again, it's that filter. Are you cool? Can we hang with you? Do we like you? Which is very important in that space, right? You're in the studio with people for hours. Liking each other is gonna be a bit of a factor there. That it's easy to hang with you. It's good to work with you. So he's at the end of that. He's like, yeah, I think the whole team likes you. You come back when you're done. You've got a place here. So I was excited, because then I had figured that out before I even graduated. So at least I didn't have that anxiety of, I'm graduating, I don't know what I'm going to do. And then I went to Spain. I remember my last semester was in Spain in September for fall, after that LA trip. That was a very interesting year for me, because so much was happening. I was in Boston, then I was in LA in the same year, then I was in Spain to finish. And then
what are you doing in Spain?
In Spain, I was doing so Berklee has a campus in Valencia. So I was doing a study abroad semester as my last year. So I'd moved around some of my subjects, because usually they do it in the first 2 years as a study abroad. And so I said no, and it's liberal arts that I kept. Like all my liberal arts, I kept them aside, and I said, no, I'll do them at the end of my. So I was there my last year, just like trying to, I guess, wash away the Boston experience, because I was like, that was brutal. This East Coast speed is too much. Like the minute mattered. Like if you submitted an assignment 2 seconds behind o'clock, it was late, and it wasn't even going to be accepted. So that kind of like strictness was like, okay, I'm becoming a robot a little bit, right? Towing the line. Spain sounds like a nice little. And I remember, and then I lived my best life, just like going hard, just like outside learning Spanish. Now you like dealing with now this information that's all new. This and that lifestyle, the siesta in the middle of the day, the 12 midnight dinners, because they take their time, 2-hour dinners. And so then I got back into like, normal, life of not being a robot. And then it's like, okay, now it's time to go back to LA and start this career, which was 2016. And I started working with Tony and them.
I saw you also spent some time in Ghana.
I did. That was also actually all in that year.
Yeah.
Because then when I came back home from Spain, it was December. And I knew I was going to spend like December here and then go back to LA in Jan. But in between that time when I was here, a friend reached out from Berklee, a bassist from Italy. And he was like, I'm doing all the stuff in Ghana, music programming stuff, on more so the music therapy stuff that I'm trying to, program into some of the spaces in Ghana. And since you seem like you're in Africa now, why don't you fly up from South Africa, come hang out with us, plug in, and then you continue on to LA. So then I spent some time in Ghana in that January.
Because I found some blog posts that you wrote.
I wrote that one. Yeah.
Around that experience.
Yeah. That was a great experience. I think it was the first time in West Africa, because I'd been to Ethiopia before, and West Africa was a whole different vibe.
Yeah.
Yeah, the drumming was amazing. Rhythmic stuff, very rhythmic space. Because I think, they're big on drums.
What was it like now working? I mean, like, what did your work involve?
Starting off there, then it was the technical aspects of the sound, right? Because we'd receive the production and the artist's vocals, everything is there. And then it's like, and I remember going, I think I learned in that year more than I'd learned in the 4 years of studying sound, because it was practical now. And it was at the highest level of how does these records really get polished the way that they do.
Because I mean, he's also worked with. I mean, he's worked with every top artist you can think about. So it's not you can't be there tataring my chance.
100%. And I think he also did Berklee at some point, 83 maybe. So he respected the program, and he knew that I was competent from session preparation, Pro Tools, being competent at that. He had his the way he did things, right? A system, how the stems, how we arrange the vocals. We color code this, we color code the drums, we'll color code the guitar, we'll color code the piano, and then it's all set up. We clean up some of the stuff that needs to get cleaned, pops and things that shouldn't be in the audio, and then he'd mix it, and I'd be there seeing now, okay, what decisions is he making in real time? What problems is he finding? What's he EQing out? How's he creating space? The reverb that he adds to stuff, the delay to add depth into the song. And I noticed too, one of his, it's like, okay, what's the methodology here? Because I wasn't getting it at Berklee. I was more so learning the technical aspects, but now the creative decisions I was learning, and the kick would be the first thing he'd resolve, how it sits in the track, where it's gonna, how much space is it gonna take, and then he'd build up as if he's constructing a building, and finish with the vocals and vocal writing the vocal track. And I remember one time he's like, hey, because he's got a lot of gear, and he's like, I think in my head I heard him say, change the setting to, and I went and I changed the Beyonce vocal setting. turns around and he's like, what did you just do? I'm like, but you said I should. He said, no, I said, record the setting. I was like, oh man, this is the top level stuff. And here I am messing up this man's vocal. And he was like, oh, okay, all right. Now I'm going to have to redo the decisions that I just made. And it was high level pressure stuff, you know? And you knew that, okay, you have to be paying attention and crossing your T's, dotting your I's. But then I was like, I even call it still the dark art of music making is the mixing decisions that come with, you know, production, which is great production, bad mix, not such a great song. Great production, great mix, you've got, you know, what you need.
So you've now kind of just expanded into a bunch of different stuff. Like you got DJing, you've got Amapiano, which is experiences as well as clothing. I mean, I see you have full clothing range. At what stage do you start going, actually, I don't want to just sit in this particular space? These are other things that I'm interested in, and start. At what stage do you start kind of expanding what you're doing?
Yeah, it's because it was, you know, because I remember you think you have a background idea. I remember before I did leave, and it was because of that decision that I'd made about going to Berklee. I actually wrote. I think this is after I'd left Urban Brew. So I was 21 now, making that decision, and took some courses about mind power. I forgot, it was John Kehoe, I think, the book. Yeah, that is it 21 something? Mind Power, though, is the name.
Yeah. So John Kehoe's book is Mind Power. The main book.
The main book. And then I started doing a lot of that work, the affirmation, visualization, seeding, and then saying, oh, write out your goals. So I had short-term goals. I still want to try to find that piece of paper. I had it somewhere on my wall at home in Pretoria. Short-term, I had like 4 points. Medium, maybe 5, 4. Long, 4, 3. And it involved DJing. So it was my career goals. But along the way, then it's like you still have to do step 1, short-term. What is that? Getting into Berklee. What's medium? And I was just playing out now, not paying attention to the fact that I'd written all this down, but just, you know, going through the motions and then landing up in the space where I think I'd written it somewhere in the goal points, engineering, top level, the production. Then I'm like, okay, you're in a good space with Mirrorball and Tony and the team, and all these big records are happening in front of you. You're part of this process, but you're not spending as much time producing, which is more creative for you, which is like what I'm passionate about too. And there was a production arm in the company. Stefan Skarberg, who worked on Amy Winehouse stuff, he was more on the production leg. And then Tony was more on the engineering, and they were partners. So I got a good amount of like, okay, let me go spend time producing and working on creative ideas with Stefan. And then eventually you're like, okay, creatively, how much independence do I want to make now my own decisions after learning and being involved in these projects and this experience? Which is then in that same street in LA, in North Hollywood, there's a bunch of studios. That whole area is like lots of producers, lots of songwriters, well-known. People will have studios up there. Raphael Sadiq had space that I'd seen more. These guys are everywhere here working. And then I'd run into friends when after I'd been at Tony's, maybe go down the road to another studio with some friends who have a whole different approach. They're more in the trap scene, and it's FL Studio. Oh man, this part I'm not getting where I am, and I'd never really worked on FL Studio much, right? You still think, we're Pro Tools people. Then you're like, but the music that's coming out of this thing is Atlanta, it's the sound. So then I start getting into more production on that level. more on the hip hop and trap scene, and that's a more independent move on my end. And then eventually ended up opening a studio, partnering with a friend in that one of those buildings, where now it was a bunch of younger guys just doing the more of the rap scene, production and recording stuff. Brian Soko was one of them. He's a Zimbabwean background, and he's one of the producers on Drunk in Love, and he got a Grammy for that. So we had that rapport of being from Southern Africa. We became good friends. We were in that space working, and that's when I started really coming into my own as far as like my own decisions and forging a space for myself and a studio space that is now Global Sound Studio LA. That I was like, okay, I'll record the artists. They'll come to me for production or for mixing and writing. And then I was like, okay, now I'm getting to think the DJ aspect of my career. And then I'm out on the weekends playing bars and parties. And at the time, it's more hip hop scene. Amapiano hasn't really come through. Afrobeats is still building. But I always wanted to stick to the DJing because it started with house music before I left the vinyl, the very expensive task of buying vinyls. And I left my turntables here, but I got a controller there. And so I kept on doing gigs, knowing that Monday to Friday, I'm in the studio. Friday to Sunday, I'm on the decks and making sure that's happening consistently. And which is why I kept building on the DJ stuff, which ended up being Amakinze Vibe, which is because then as the African sound was bubbling and growing and Amapiano was getting bigger, I made a decision. I said, okay, because I'm South African, I'm into the music and I love where Amapiano is, then I focused more and more on creating the identity of, I'll do Amapiano gigs in LA. Amakinze Vibe will be the multimedia brand in which I do it. I'll promote and do the production now behind events, which is a whole other thing besides just the DJing aspect on the front end.
How do you make sense of all of this stuff? I mean, it looks like you're doing, it's like a lot of different things, right? And I often have conversations with people who do that, and I always kind of operate the same way. But it's always interesting how each of us is finding a way of making sense of these multiple aspects of who we are. So, there's production work, there's the engineering work, there's Amakinze
A vibe,
and what's happening with that. And even that it has multiple layers to it, right? So it's not just DJing, it's not just creating experiences, it's clothing, it's online stores, then it's e-commerce, then it's all of that. And then you have your label.
Yeah.
How do you make sense of it in your head?
So eventually I called someone who could help me do that, right? Very recently, we're still developing that now as we speak. A month ago, I was like, okay, the label now also is a factor. I'm signing artists, Andile being one of them, and I've got a Amakinze Vibe.
I do want to get into that
right?
Because it's fascinating. The mentee signing the mentor.
So then it's happening, and I'm like, what do I have going on? What's going on here? The studio is in LA. It's its own thing. Global Sound Studio, the brand, what it means, and as a studio space, as a business, and Amakinze Vibe as a multimedia brand at this point. As you've said, it's like got the retail leg of things, the fashion line, the events, and TV, there's actually a TV production in that, so which is why it's a multimedia brand. And then the record label, We Want More. Then I'm like, okay, now We Want More has been an idea before I left for Berklee, or a label idea, or how I was working now when I was outside of the 9 to 5 with Urban Brew as a composer or Sonovision as a sound designer for radio. I brought it back and I said, okay, We Want More is the label. All of this that I'm doing should fall under that. That's the umbrella. We Want More. Amakinze Vibe falls under that. Global Sound Studio LA falls under that. The artists, myself, anything that'll be the vehicle. And then I spoke to a friend of mine who's an economist essentially, and has financial models for businesses that he'd created based on the business. And I said, hey man, I need to unpack this. I need to, and he graciously did it. And I looked at it, because then it was like, where's the revenue stream coming from? How's this making sense? When you execute this, what does it mean for this? And how does this affect that? And now the artist means what? And how's the money coming in for that, for the artist?
And it's across countries.
And it's across countries. So there's 2 registrations. You've got the LLC across in LA as an LLC. You've got the PTY LTD here. And even signing with Virgin, which is the partner. Mm-hmm. We have a partnership with Virgin. We Want More has, right? Towards the end of last year. And I remember like filling out the details, and I'm thinking, do I use the American address? Should I open a PTY? Are they gonna be able to send the money across into the Bank of America account or the Chase account?
Yeah, because I mean, dealing with moving money and where revenue is
right.
made and therefore tax.
Exactly.
So all of those things you have to take into consideration.
Right. Who am I going to pay 2 tax? This tax here, the tax there. But the eventuality was to just, okay, it's 2 spaces, and you need the systems for each space. Because then if Virgin's like, we don't know how to deal with an account that needs to get wired internationally, or we prefer that you have the account opened here, which is done. And that's the stuff. Then also when he's looking at all of these dots and points that are connected to each other, as it is of the Amakinsa, We Want More. And now I've looked at it and I said, wow, it's like you took my brain and business and all this stuff and you put it right in front of me so I can actually see what's really going on, and then strategize on the decisions I must make between me being the artist and performing, and then the record and the artist as now being signing artists into the label, and the decisions and the support and the resources that must go into their success. It's at least giving me an opportunity to just at least look at the pieces on the board versus just waking up and saying, what's first, what's second?
Where's home for you?
It's like, it's a simple response. I'll say, oh, immediate family home, Pretoria, right? Pretoria. But then it's like, well, you also are very much at home when you're in LA, because that is your home. You've spent more than 10 years there. You have a place. You have all this like assets and stuff. You have a studio, and for me, that is home. When I'm like, oh man, I miss my apartment. I'm sitting in, Hollywood. Oh yeah. And I think about how connected I am to LA, and that's home too. This is home, Johannesburg, because I grew up here, went to boarding school here. Very much is ingrained in my DNA. And then Eastern Cape, same thing. My childhood, I go back still, once a year, or at least every second year, I'm there. I'm very much connected to the Eastern Cape. It's an ancestral home. So those are my homes.
It's a question I like to ask, because it's a question I was asked once. And it's very similar to yours, where the idea of, I think for a long time we've always had this very kind of singular idea of what home means. But there increasingly more and more of us who home is not a single place or a single thing. I'm always fascinated by people, particularly like, such as yourself, where you've moved around and you've established yourself in different spaces. And then because the conversation around where home is becomes in a way, a emotional one. And one of my recent guests was like, it was people. Because she moved around a lot growing up. But the consistent were her mother and her grandparents.
Yeah.
So home is wherever they are.
Yeah.
As opposed to the place.
The location.
The location.
Yeah.
You know, so I'm always fascinated by that.
And the home is where the heart is.
Yeah. I mean, and
sense.
look, I have kids, I have a family.
Yeah.
So starting point now is home is where my family is. I grew up in Lesotho, and my father lived there till he passed away. So that was home. But then after he passed away, it's just my brothers. It's not really home, but it is home because that's the space that raised me.
Yeah.
So I find those conversations really interesting because I think all of us are redefining what words like that actually mean. But let's talk about you going and signing the person who you list as your mentor. What is that conversation like?
I remember we linked up early last year. We hadn't seen each other in years, I think, at that point. I wasn't even counting. I was thinking maybe, is it 8 years or, around. In terms of physically being in the same space, we've been communicating online. And then he'd been a bit of a recluse a little bit too in his career. Between the albums that he made at the time, Who's Got the Map, and We Used to Dance. And he never put on another project since. But he was well renowned. We'd perform there and there. And then he went to Natal to teach eventually. And when I came back, he was having a show in Pretoria. And my plans weren't exactly what is playing out now. But I knew, I was like, how do I get him out more? And, and tell him, like, we need more new material from you as people who are fans. And he heard me. And even on Friday, we just did an event now at African Freedom Station. It was me and him. And we called it Maestro and the Prodigy.
Yeah.
And, and it was an ode to that. And even in the current, arrangement we have, it was like he mentioned in that performance, like, where we are now. And he's got the Metro FM nomination for Best Jazz Album now coming up. And he's like, this young man came back from the States and we had linked up last year, conversation, very casual. I'm performing, I'm outside, I've got stressed with the band and the travel stuff, and I'm in his ear like, let's make it shake. And I gave him some ideas. We can do this, I can do this, and I can put this together and make sure I can maybe come out to Natal, we'll get in the studio, just get movement going. And then the year starts playing out. I release my album. I'm signing a partnership with Virgin. I'm in a position now to then facilitate what makes sense as a record label. And obviously my first thought is, okay, I had this conversation already. Someone else brings it up and says, yeah, but I need this thing about releasing an album. And I said, oh, great. And what are your thoughts on signing him? I said, yeah, 100%. Let's get, and even him conversating with him about that. He's like, the album's good. We can, so I've recorded it in Switzerland. I said, okay, let me get the material, listen, give some feedback, and then facilitate that whole arrangement of then doing the release and signing. And he was happy that, he was getting back in action and putting out music and putting out, stuff that hadn't, we'd all been waiting to hear for all these many years.
I mean, he like you said, he did kind of go underneath radar. Feels like for a while. And like I mentioned to you, I mean, we were at Varsity at the same time, so yeah. I've always had a soft spot for him. because he used to play at our bar on campus. But yeah, I mean, it's nice seeing him kind of come out a bit more and start to hear a bit more about him, from him and of him. I also know that, like, I don't know whether it's an age thing or an industry thing, but a lot of us have started to like withdraw from spaces. And sometimes you need somebody to kind of go, just put your head out a little bit, which is something I personally still struggle with. Like, it's easier to live in your little bubble, let the world happen.
Yeah.
There was a time when you needed to be at the forefront to know what's going on. But yeah, I mean, it's great to see him starting to come out with music again and starting to be a bit more active. What is, for you personally, what is the plan? I mean, like let's say, what does the next year or two look like? Because, I mean, you're spending more time here now. You still have your base in the US. You are doing a lot of stuff behind the scenes, but you're also now stepping out in front at the exact same time. So what does the next year look like for you in terms of whether it's pushing the label, it's running the events, it's spending, how you divide up your time? Because now you're setting up all these things here, which means you need to be here more.
Yeah.
But you still have stuff there.
Yeah.
And it's also important that, I can imagine it's important that you keep that stuff going, because that's the foundation. Like, the foundation started here, but then you solidified it there, and it's enabling you to do the things that you're doing here now. So you can't afford to let that also slack.
God has the plan. I'm just a human being living day to day, but making sure each day, if you're taking it a day at a time, which is helping with the financial model, just to see the pieces. The vision is somewhat of a background play that's happening, and I'm trusting that the subconscious is making those decisions quite diligently, and then the conscious is executing on that level. That's like, I see the end game there, but consciously I haven't really seen exactly where that narrative plays out. I think jazz being an improvisational genre, and I think life is pretty much a big improvisation, if you're being honest, right? Because as they say, we make plans and God laughs. Because even this happening now and the way the past year has played out was not a plan that I made. So it's accepting, also partly accepting that you can make the plans, but how it's not going to be a straight line. So I have intentions, at least, about how it all makes sense, and the LA and the South African trajectories are intertwined, and we're bridging things in that sense. One of the strategies is team building, big time, because then in LA, I still have a team that I can count on to execute the projects that need to be executed. I can survive the studio space. Here too, now that I'm cultivating a team here, that I'm like, guys, that when I'm out of town, I'm expecting that, you're going to have the capacity to handle what we're building in that sense. So I think teamwork really can free you as a person to know that you've got trusted people in your corner who believe in the same vision, and are executing on the level that you hope they would.
What do you do when you're not working? All of this thinking sounds like work related.
Yeah.
What do you do when you're not working?
Well, hey, there's not much non-work time non-work time. I mean, I feel like because I enjoy my work so much, it's almost like fun still. Like I'm having a good time. So it's not almost like I'm in an office and I'm out and I'm clocking in. It's 24/7. But if I'm really taking time off where I'm like, I need to do something non-music related, I've picked up a big love for horse riding. And that's when I'm like, okay, this is about horses, nothing else. Just figure this out. Sit on the saddle and don't fall off and control the horse the way you're being taught the riding. I started riding Western in LA at a ranch, like 40 minutes drive outside LA. This black woman called Miss Deborah. She was like from, I think, Texas, a very amazing rider, or, champion rider. And she started me off. And it was like that thing of like, oh, this is a whole new skill set. It's like, okay, remember when you couldn't play piano? Or you remember when you couldn't drive a car? This is it. So start slow, be easy. And then I started getting into English riding here in another ranch out in Pretoria. And it's like, as long as like, when I'm like thinking about what can you do outside of this space that you're in, it's the riding.
What's exciting you now?
Alive with possibilities, eh? What's exciting? I think, even though this is home and there's a background, I'm still navigating almost like a new space and a new experience. Because there's change in everything, and even the people, my, network of people, friends, where they are in their lives, what's changed. You spoke a bit about the not going out so much and growing up, and then it's like there's a new energy of who's the youth now. I just did an interview with Y yesterday, YFM, which I grew up listening to plenty, and know the history. And I'm thinking, I wonder who's listening. Like, what's the audience? Oh, where's the kids that are listening to Y? And I'll ask guys, do you guys still listen to Y? Oh, we were on Metro and maybe Radio 2000. And I'm like,
No.
Okay.
We left Y a long time.
Hey,
Long
what do
time
you
ago.
mean you left Y, guys? So that's interesting to, to say, okay, that's the nature of, the timeline we're in, 2026.
No, cool. Thank you very much, man. Thank you for listening to this conversation. Please leave a review and subscribe. Check out the show notes for links to the guest, the podcast, and myself. I hope you enjoyed listening to the conversation as much as I enjoyed having it.